Okay, so today I'm joined by Rose, who is the Director of Family and Children's Program at Illumination Foundation. Rose and I had met back in the day when I was a grant writer, and she's still going strong in this program. So Rose, can you tell us what you're currently working on now that, with COVID and everything?
Yeah. So as Caroline mentioned, my name is Rose Wolfram. I'm the director of children and families programs for the Illumination Foundation. I have actually almost worked for the Illumination Foundation for 10 years. And in my time and tenure with the Illumination Foundation, I have done various things and overseen various projects. So when I first started with Illumination Foundation almost 10 years ago, I was overseeing our children's programs in motels where we were serving families. And these were motels in Anaheim, Costa Mesa, and Santa Ana. Definitely in some of, the areas close to Disneyland, and areas where there are a lot of folks experiencing poverty. As that transitioned, I began overseeing our children's resource centers in Stanton and Santa Ana, where we had approximately 100 children that we would serve between the two sites every week, and we would provide them with after-school care, early childhood enrichment services, counseling, and various other extracurricular activities after school. Um, then at a certain point in time, I have overseen our family shelters, where we provide emergency shelter for families experiencing homelessness, particularly families experiencing homelessness with children between the age of 0 and 5. As a result of the COVID pandemic, the Illumination Foundation was actually selected by the County of Orange to provide, to be the service provider for what is called Project Roomkey. Project Roomkey was initiated by the state of California in conjunction with funds from FEMA to provide temporary shelter using underutilized hotels to those experiencing homelessness with the highest level of vulnerability to the negative effects of COVID. So, for example, individuals living with type 2 diabetes, heart conditions, HIV, and those over the age of 65. So now the Illumination Foundation has approximately every week 550 to 600 clients that we serve and provide shelter for with the vulnerable population shelters. I currently oversee the vulnerable population shelter in Huntington Beach, which currently has 140 guests or residents staying at it, and we are utilizing the Marriott Spring Hill in Huntington Beach. So the whole project and the point of it, right, was to provide shelter in hotels that wouldn't be otherwise utilized due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So within the scope of this program, we provide shelter, food, essentially the necessities that individuals need to survive each day. So
Super resourceful,
a
super.
lot, a
I,
lot of different things.
Well, Rose, you've come a long way. I mean, dabbling in so many different kinds of aspects of really helping grow this program. The Children's Resource Center is like your baby and it's flourished. And now you're, tackling something else and helping these individuals that are, experiencing a really tough time during this pandemic. Already, like homelessness has been such a prevalent problem in our society. Right now with COVID, are you just constantly bombarded like with in terms of like intake?
Like individuals seeking shelter.
Yeah, I can only
Yeah,
imagine just people losing their jobs and such.
yeah. There's, definitely been a surge, right, of individuals and families seeking shelter because a lot of the hardship that folks have faced under COVID-19. I suspect because there's still eviction protections in place for a lot of families,
Mhm.
particularly, but I suspect when that ends, when whatever that protection is, which has kind of been going up and down as to how long that will be extended for. whenever that does expire, because it's not just like with the eviction protection, it's not just that, oh, you can't be evicted during this time, and then when this expires that you don't have to pay that back rent. It's no, you have to come up with a plan and pay that back rent. And if individuals have been laid off or haven't been able to work for various reasons, purposes of childcare, right? Kids aren't in school. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. So I suspect when those laws and statutes do expire, that we'll see a bigger uptick then, unfortunately.
Rose, how do you manage, you deal with so much on an emotional level every day, and like working with the children's resource centers, like young children experiencing suicidal ideation. And now with the pandemic, stress is heightened on a whole nother level. It's a different ballgame now. But like, how do you manage that? You are one of the most resilient people I've ever come across, and you're incredibly strong and grounded in advocating for yourself and for this program. And this is the reason why it's grown as much as it has. But emotionally, like do you take it home with you? How do you manage that?
I think, at a professional and personal level, it's impossible not to take some aspect, like your brain just doesn't shut off and you stop thinking,
Yeah.
about the individuals that you're working with. But you really do have to have, certain practices that you put in place to protect yourself, because it can get really overwhelming, and it can be all time, soul, emotional, spiritual body, embodying, and consuming you. So it really is important to, we hear this so often, but practice self-care. And self-care doesn't just mean, although like I do, take baths and try to exercise as much as I can, but it doesn't just mean those things. It means, going and getting regular health care, making sure that you go to your your biannual dental appointments, making sure that things like that really do help preserve you, are done. And it also is, like after a certain period of time, if it's a client, I'm not going to answer my phone. Or if it's at 7 a.m., I'm not going to answer my phone. You have to put certain parameters up for yourself, because, otherwise it will consume you.
Yeah, like we've just learned the idiom of like spreading yourself too thin. And I think that's why setting those boundaries for
Yeah,
yourself.
exactly. You don't want to spread yourself too thin.
Rose, I have students that are interested in kind of pursuing this route, like, something to help like health and human services, or maybe pursuing something in like domestic abuse, like, or, drug prevention, something of that sort. But the only experience they've had is in like the volunteer field. But in order to actually have a position or job, what kind of advice do you have for my students?
My advice, first of all, starting off, I think as a volunteer is always a really, really great way to go. I, in a managerial position, have hired uh, countless amount of people who actually started off as volunteers or interns, and then really were able to show what a good employee they would be, and then after the end of their time of employment got hired. Or I even said, hey, I really would like you to apply. We have a position open and I would really like you to apply for it because I see how dedicated you are to the work. So I think starting off as an intern or volunteer is never a bad way to go, because I really believe that it can open itself up to opportunities. I would generally say, if your only experience also is in the volunteer realm, it doesn't hurt to take classes or get additional education on the topic of which that you're interested in working in. But thankfully, specifically in the human services field, a lot of the times, even if you have lived experience, that can bring a lot of value to the table, because you have an additional layer of understanding that not a lot of folks possess. So I think that that can also be a really important life experience that can be added onto the table as well. If you do come into an interview, you can, bring that portion up.
Rose, so earlier I had interviewed Aiko, and one thing we talked about is dealing with, like the emotional heaviness of the job. And for her, like, because I asked her, as like an executive director, and similar to your position, being a director, there's a trickle down effect. Like your team feeds off of your energy, right? So Aiko, her way of dealing with it is like levity, humor, right? Because she said, even though if you're going through something difficult, it's best to have like a positive attitude and make it fun and enjoyable, not to like deter people from going back to work, right? So for you, how do you manage your team? Like what have you done that's been successful?
I would also say, like, to piggyback off of Aiko, I have worked with kids for so many years that the silliness kind of just pours out of me sometimes. I can't stop it, like a leaky faucet, where, I will just, if when things get really hectic or chaotic, I will become silly. And that sometimes can lighten, I think, the mood for everyone. But I think also in a managerial position, right, it's having empathy, right? The same, and that could be tricky sometimes when you're working in the human services field, because you are constantly having to extend empathy to other folks, and the clients that you're working with. But you can also not forget to do that with your employees. And that is always something that I have to check myself on, right? Is, am I having empathy for this person in the circumstance that they're coming from? So I think that that's really important, as a manager or as a director, is to lead with empathy. And that is how I manage.
And Rose, what drives you? Like what motivates you to get up day after day? Because this is an uphill battle. I mean, it's a tough one. How do you like, what pushes you to wake up each morning, come to work and do this?
What pushes me to get up every day and continue to do this work is because um, it this there are folks who are really experiencing adversity, and my personal philosophy is that a lot of individuals and families and people have experienced trauma, and that goes across all different socioeconomic um, ranges. But unfortunately, for those who are also experiencing homelessness and poverty, they really don't have the same opportunity to heal that folks experiencing privilege do. Because, if I'm a person from an upper middle class family, it's a lot easier for me to engage in therapy, to engage in these healing processes, to cut off relationships with certain individuals who may be toxic, because I have the means and the resources to do so. It's a lot easier to engage in therapy and think about my own mental health when I know where I am going to sleep that night, right? Where I know what I'm going to eat for dinner, right? Those are not constant worries that I'm facing. If I'm a person experiencing homelessness and I've had trauma now that has been compounded and compounded and compounded over time, right? That's going to be a lot harder for me to do. So my goal and what keeps me driven to get up every day is that I just believe that everybody who has been born onto the earth deserves the opportunity, space, and time to heal for things that have hurt them, right? And for me, it's a privilege to be able to sit with people in that process, to see them heal, and to hopefully see them, transcend beyond that. And that is really what keeps me going every day. That's what keeps me getting up.
Well said, Rose. You have such a beautiful heart. And I think honestly, like this interview it's slightly different from the ones that I've done previously with like sales and IT and such, because you give that human the humanistic perspective of our world that we really do need to be more conscientious of, especially for like my international students coming here. The image of America is like land of opportunity where everyone has money, but it's a whole other reality, right?
It is a whole other reality. And, you know, we kind of have, I think at this point in time, and we can look at, you know, politics, we can look at the news, and this is pretty easy to see that for a lot of individuals, it's a land of two different Americas. You know, the land of America for folks who have resources and money and time, and, you know, the land of America for those who don't. And those are very two different realities.
My last question for Rose is how have you changed? You know, every point in your life, you know, I feel like you find yourself, lose yourself at various points, but it's like an ongoing evolution. For you, like I remember, you know, like you were learning Spanish, getting quite fluent at it, but like aside from skill sets, like or skill sets too, I suppose, but how have you changed overall?
I think how I have changed, I mean, I think me as a person, I think sometimes, especially when I was younger, not that I'm, you know, such a sage, you know, wise older person, but I have aged in the 10 years that I've worked here. I think that I have learned that it's not okay to know everything.
Mhm.
And, you know, that's constantly still something that I have to check myself on, right? Because for me, if I have a fear of not knowing something, it you know, it equates to incompetence, which is quite definitely not true, right? It's a time and space for an opportunity to learn. And I think I have changed, that I am, you know, more open to accepting that kind of information and that position, because that is a space and time where you make yourself vulnerable. And you know, much like the people that I work with and serve every day who are willing to be vulnerable with me, I have to make my own self be vulnerable in a lot of different spaces.
Well, Rose, you know, my class and I'm sure they feel the same way. We're so grateful that there are people like you out in the world to make such a difference. And I hope, you know, the positive ripple effect will continue for years to come. So thank you for taking your lunch break to interview with me.
No problem. You're welcome. My pleasure.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you so much for having me.
thank you.